Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Idahoan Show. I recently bought this Holosun HE509T red dot sight. Probably the most expensive sight that I've ever purchased, and yes, I did pay full price for it. This wasn't any kind of a promotional offer or anything like that. I mounted it on my Springfield XD in 45 auto, got a separate video on that. That was not terribly straightforward. I had to make some modifications to the gun in order to be able to mount this, but I did not make any modifications to the sight itself. The sight was in its standard factory configuration when I put it on the gun. Now, I took it out to the range and I fired about 10 shots as I was starting to try and sight it in, and I noticed that the battery tray was kind of sticking out on the side. I was like, well, that's weird. So I looked at it, and the head of the screw that is supposed to hold the battery tray in place has apparently just popped off. I can see the broken end of the screw in there, but the head is missing and the tray is no longer secured. There's a better view of that. You can see what's left of the screw in there. Now, I actually tried looking at the fracture face of the broken screw with a magnifier. Okay, it's probably hopeless getting the camera to focus on that. And getting a camera view through the magnifier turned out to be hopeless, so I can't actually show you what the fracture face looked like, but I can tell you that it looks like pretty much your stereotypical brittle fracture. Clearly transgranular, you can see a lot of the broken grain faces glinting, and possibly a couple of very faint beach marks over on one side. So what that tells me as an engineer, or what my hypothesis would be, is that the screw failed due to improper heat treatment. The screw must have been excessively brittle, and so, even though it's not really under load itself, as the sight gets slammed back and forth as the slide cycles, just that incidental loading was enough to cause a crack to initiate and propagate across the surface of the screw, or across the thickness of the screw. Possibly with low cycle fatigue, 3 to 4 cycles, based on the beach marks, maybe as much as 10, given that I fired a 10-shot group. Or possibly it all happened at once, because again, those beach marks are pretty faint. It's hard to really tell for sure what happened there. But what I can say with reasonable assurance is that the screw failed due to a defect in materials. So this is maybe not so much a problem with Holosun's quality control as with quality control of their supplier, because I would imagine that they're buying standard screws from another supplier company. Now, obviously, this is a serious problem. I mean, if the battery tray won't stay in, the sight is functionally unusable. It's not useful in any practical sense. So it needs to be repaired or replaced. Conceivably, I could drill out the screw and replace it, but that would be a pretty difficult operation. And a defect in materials like this is something that would normally be covered under warranty. So I think at this point the sensible thing to do is see if I can get this replaced under warranty, either from Holosun directly or through the distributor that I bought it from. And after I've given that a try, I'll get back to you with more information. And I'm back. For you, that probably didn't seem like any time at all, but for me it was about 3 weeks. I filled out a warranty claim on Holosun's website. They emailed me a prepaid shipping label to send the sight back to them. They apparently got the broken screw out and replaced it with another one that hopefully will not break on us, and sent it back to me, and I received it today. So at this point, I think we need to take this out and do some testing with it. Okay, at this point I think I've got the optic reasonably well sighted in, and it seems to be working okay. One thing I do notice, though, is that there is some visible distortion. Let me turn the camera around and see if I can show that to you. Okay, I'm not really sure how well you could see that on the camera, but take my word for it, there is some noticeable distortion of the image looking through the sight, particularly towards the top. And I think that's mostly just a product of how compact the sight is. You know, if you take like a rifle-sized red dot and you shrink it down to something this length, then you have to use a lens with a much steeper curvature, and that increased curvature is what gives rise to the distortion, or at least makes it more noticeable. Now, the question that this raises for me is whether the distortion could affect accuracy. I mean, yes, the distortion is definitely aesthetically annoying. It's a little bit distracting, but I can work with it. However, if it actually changes the point of impact, then that starts to compromise the utility of the sight. Because, the theory with a red dot or a reflex style of sight like this is that, as long as the dot is visible anywhere in your field of view, then the shot should go to the dot. And so I think what we need to do next is set up a couple of different targets, and I'll shoot one of them with the dot kind of in the upper left-hand corner of the viewing window. I'll shoot another one with the dot pretty well centered, and then I'll shoot another one with the dot in the lower right-hand corner. And we'll see if we can detect any shift in the point of impact depending on where the dot is inside the viewing window. Okay, well, the results are a little bit inconclusive. There's definitely no vertical shift. These are all pretty much centered on the vertical center line of the target. Horizontally, there does seem to be a little bit of a shift. I mean, this group looks pretty well zeroed. This one looks like it's about a ½ an inch to the right, and this one is about a full inch to the right. So as I shift from the upper left corner to the center to the lower right corner, the group does appear to be moving a little bit to the right. Now, that said, this one, I shot an exceptionally good group, if I do say so myself, and that group is pretty clearly centered, about an inch to the right of my nominal zero. Whereas these other two groups are big enough that the zero is kind of within the error bars of the group. So, if we repeated this, 100 times, we could get a much more statistically significant result to say whether the group is really shifting or whether it's just my shooting that's causing the deviation. In any case, I think I would say that at reasonable pistol distances, and as long as your target is, 3 inches across or more, which would be typical for things you'd be shooting at with a pistol, then this amount of shift is not going to be significant, even if there is a shift going on here. Results and conclusions. There was that issue with the screw up front, but the company took care of that. There is the issue of the optical distortion, but while that is maybe a little distracting, certainly a little annoying, it doesn't seem to have much effect on accuracy. If it does have an effect, the magnitude of the effect is small enough that it's probably not going to be of any practical significance. So overall, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm impressed with the Holosun sight here, but I'd say I'm satisfied with it. It does what I need it to do as far as I can tell at this point. Now, of course, with a red dot sight like this, there's always the question of zero retention over time. I haven't really done enough shooting with the Holosun sight yet to assess that, and I've had problems with that with, like, the Bushnell TRS-25. So I'm not sure if I'll wait to post this video until I've had a chance to assess that, or maybe post this and then a year or two later I can post an update addressing that issue. But that is one thing that I have not yet been able to definitively assess. Another thing to keep in mind is that my review of a product is always going to be based, at least partially, on how it compares to other competing products. And in this case, there's not really a lot of other products that I can directly compare this to. As far as I'm aware, at the time that I'm filming this, the only other fully enclosed, purpose-built, pistol-style red dot sight like this that's available on the market is the Aimpoint, which is about twice as expensive as the Holosun. And so, it would certainly be interesting to get a hold of an Aimpoint and, see if it seems like a better sight, if maybe there's less distortion or anything like that. But if you're on a limited budget like me, then the fact that the Holosun does basically the same thing for half the price makes it a very favorable comparison. Now, I guess the other option that I didn't really consider up front is that there are generic brand rifle-style fully enclosed red dot sights that sell for as little as $20. So maybe an alternative to consider if I'm on a tight budget would be buying the smallest one of those that I could find and just mounting that on a pistol to see what would happen. I mean, those obviously are going to be bigger, they're going to be heavier, they're going to be taller. So would the added weight prevent the slide from cycling correctly? Would the height over bore of your line of sight be a problem? Would the impulse of the slide banging back and forth just destroy a cheap, generic brand sight like that? Or, would something like that offer a perfectly viable alternative for a 20th of the price of the Holosun? I might have to do that experiment at some point and find out. But for now, I think that concludes my initial review of the Holosun HE509T. Okay, quick addendum to my sight review. The other day I was shooting kind of in the late afternoon. The sun was getting sort of low. I wasn't shooting into the sun per se, but getting maybe sort of close to having the light in my eyes. And I noticed that I was getting some pretty bad glare or reflections. I'm not sure what the best term for it is, but the light was interfering with the sight. Not sure how well you're going to be able to see this on camera, but if you can see in there, the sunlight, I think, is actually reflecting off some metal traces on a circuit board around the light-emitting diode. So I'm actually getting like this faint apparition of circuit board leads around and below the dot. And then at certain angles, notice I can also get another dot in the sight that is not the sighting dot and doesn't move with it. It must be a reflection of the sun somehow, but it's about the same size as the sight dot and actually considerably cleaner and brighter. And the issue seems to be somewhat unique to this site. I've never seen anything like that with my rifle-style red dot sights. You may get a little bit of lens flare, but I don't get the apparitions or the fake dot that outshines the real one. Now that I know what to expect from this sight when shooting into the sun, I think I can work with it. Certainly the fake dot and the apparitions could be a little distracting or even confusing, but then again, shooting into the sun is never going to be an ideal situation with any sight. So I don't consider it a showstopper, but it's definitely something that you want to be aware of. And I'm back. It's been several months now since I filmed my initial review of the Holosun sight here. And for a while, it seemed like it wasn't holding a zero very well. But in trying to diagnose the problem, I was able to tentatively trace it to the brass shims that I had between the mounting block and the sight itself. Seemed like they just weren't holding up and they were allowing the sight to shift around a little bit, hence allowing the zero to wander. So I ended up actually machining a new mounting block that's a little bit bigger and thus does not need the shims. And then I machined off the old mounting block and welded on the new one. And once I had the sight remounted to the new block, I zeroed it. I put several hundred rounds through it over the course of a few months. And then just now I rechecked the zero and it's still right on. And the wind's coming up, so I moved the camera around to try and get out of the wind as much as possible. But anyway, at this point I think I've demonstrated beyond any reasonable doubt that the problem was with the shims and not with the sight itself. So I wouldn't say I'm enamored with the Holosun sight. I feel like it costs too much and I don't like the optical distortion. But at this point, I am reasonably confident that I can depend on it to function reliably. So that concludes my review. Hopefully you found some useful information in this video, and until next time, thank you for watching The Idahoan Show.